All right, we are here on Left at the Projector this week talking about the 2021 film Dune, and back again on the show. I have Commie Trucker. Thanks for coming on again.
Hey, of course, no problem. It's a
Yes, yeah,
pleasure.
yeah. I'm glad to have you back. I know we've been thinking about another movie to do, and I feel like Dune has been, given the novel came out, I think 60 years ago now, which is kind of hard to believe. I think in 19,
It was
I
early 60s, wasn't it?
Yeah, early I feel like 63, 64, something like that. So almost
Yeah.
60 years, but the finally got a new rendition of this movie. I don't know if you saw the David Lynch movie. Not
Bits and parts.
it's
I
not
couldn't
great.
sit through the whole thing. Yeah. I'm
But
not big on David Lynch anyway, really. I know everyone's wild about David Lynch and some of his stuff is captivating, but it's so um it's so out there sometimes. I just can't do it.
yeah, it's I feel like David Lynch is either like you love it or you just it doesn't do much. And
Yeah.
I like some of his movies, but we don't have to even broach the subject of his version of this movie. But just as a quick aside, so this movie just came out a couple years ago. There's going to be the
Mhm.
sequel. So they did a two parts of the first book. There's numerous books to this series. And the just as a quick note on the movie, it had a huge budget. It was a massive undertaking, 165 million, and it exceeded the expectations, made 400 million, which is quite a lot for a movie.
Mhm.
And I suspect they're going to expect something similar from the second one. I know you said you've read this book before. Do you have any like memories generally of just the Dune franchise or Dune series that comes
Oh
to
yeah.
mind?
I first ran across the book in my early teens, and I just remember the cover itself was captivating because it was just a desert scape, and that really that really is the beginning of my love of science fiction and speculative fiction as a whole. I didn't really grasp the enormity of it as a youth, but I revisited it in my early 20s as that was kind of reading was my means of escape. And so I fell into this universe, the original six books by Frank Herbert, and just I didn't want to leave it. I just reread these books continuously for years, and I had a deep love of the book without having like a comprehension of the deeper underlying meaning that he might have had for the books. And
Yeah,
then
he built such a huge universe. Like it's
yeah,
just world building is pretty phenomenal.
and then there's undertones and there's deeper meanings behind what he's writing, that are significant that you don't really unless you have a better comprehension and are more understanding of societal pressures that you just won't understand until you get that better the better vision of what's meant.
Yeah, and
So
we won't focus too much. I know you. It's helpful to like understand like your
yeah.
history of the book. We will try not to, given this is a movie podcast. Obviously, we've done well. The last movie we did, which was No Country for Old Men, had a movie and
Hmm.
a book, and so obviously there's times where you compare
look
and you know.
look, I'm gonna every time I come on here, I'm gonna try to drag you out of the movie and onto the page. That,
Well,
that, that
I'm
that's
not
that's my
against.
that's my
I'm
that's what I'm gonna do.
I'm not against. I've done. I think I've done like 6 or 7 movies that have books, and I've like read them. In
Hmm.
preparation. Just in this particular case, I didn't get a chance
Hmm.
to read it. I think I said before we jumped on, is I listened to the audiobook about a year ago, and it's
Hmm.
pretty captivating. I didn't get a chance to go through the whole series, but I think we will. You might be able to bring in some of the notes from the book as far as where they, I don't want to say misstepped, but where they could have done better, they left something out. And one thing
Hmm.
you have to know about the book for anyone who hasn't read it, it's from different perspectives throughout the kind of the universe, told from different viewpoints. So it's kind of impossible in most movies to create that feeling of internal dialogue and monologue. So
Yeah, this book, sorry. this was always considered an impossible book to make into a movie because they've tried it before, it flopped. They tried to do that sci-fi series on TV,
Yep.
that flopped, and it's hard to have that inner dialogue on screen. And so much of the book is just inner dialogue and deep machinations
Yeah,
that
you
just
definitely
just
don't
don't.
get that.
Yeah.
But I think they filled, from my perspective, I feel like the movie, we'll get into the plot and go through it. I think from my, I haven't read the book many times, but from my perspective, they hit all the major plot points and they give
Hmm.
you enough sort of, I don't want to call them dream sequence. I guess there are lots of dream sequences from Paul's perspective, the dreams he's having. I feel like they give you a taste of it as best they
Hmm.
can. And I appreciated the take on this. I think
Hmm.
my view is that the movie is pretty good in terms of being faithful.
Yeah, I think Villeneuve, is that how you pronounce his
Yeah, I
name?
think
The
it's Denis
director
Villeneuve.
Villeneuve. Yeah, he did great. I mean, I couldn't I can't picture a better adaptation of it. I mean, I the the vibes of the book that you get from it, the casting, how he translates those vision sequences onto the screen. I think he did great. I think he got the broader picture of the novel on the screen.
Yeah, agreed. I think we'll get to the plot, I think, maybe now, to go through some of it and talk about some of the dream sequences and a lot of the, I feel like, just the visual aspect of this movie they couldn't have done much better, to be honest. I
Hmm.
think the vastness of the desert of Arrakis and everything about it, the size and scope. You don't really get a sense of like the universe, perhaps, of how vast the
No,
universe itself is. But
yeah,
really, the most of this book and this movie takes place only on really just
the
two
one
planets.
planet. Yeah,
Well, yeah,
yeah.
well, most of it's on one planet. They have a few
Hmm.
side pieces, but kind of the starting of this movie is you have the emperor basically determining that the uh the
Atreides.
yes, yeah. I was tongue tied. The Atreides, the Duke of the Atreides family, their
Hmm.
house was being told they had to now take over um, of the planet,
Directorate.
yeah,
Yeah.
directorate of Arrakis, and basically be the what's the word you would say? Just
The rulers.
the
The
imperialist, or
Yeah.
whatever, the caretakers of the most precious material in the galaxy, or the on
Hmm.
Earth, or the whole world, the universe, of this particular called spice, which enables the travel and the creation of long distance travel by the emperor and all these different other groups. So essentially, you could say it's the most valuable planet that
Hmm.
they're aware of on Earth,
Hmm.
in this universe. And the immediately thing that struck me, just because I'm watching this from like my perspective, of my political perspective, is this feels very much like Arrakis is like Africa, going
Hmm.
back hundreds of years, and they're going there to,
Hmm.
they've colonized, and now a new ruler is coming in. The Dutch have
Yes.
left and the British are coming in, whatever you want
Yep.
to call it.
Yep.
And I don't know what you make of all that.
Absolutely. It's a commentary on imperialism. I mean, clearly the Harkonnens, who were the people that were currently in charge of production of spice and the imperial rule over Arrakis before the emperor sent the Atreides, and they were, the brutal, harsh overlords that would crack down and use people as slave labor, essentially. And then, I mean, it's clearly a commentary on our going into a planet. It's even said in the movie, the one of the native indigenous people were saying that you come in here, you take your spice, and then you go, and then the next person comes in and takes our spice and then leaves. and the whole while you brutalize us and you crush us. And he makes this short impassioned speech to the incoming Duke and says, "All we want is to be left alone. Just stay out of our desert. Take your spice. Leave us alone." And it's clearly just it's such a clear indication of the ruling overclass coming in and brutalizing a native population for their resources.
Yeah, you don't really get a sense till later in the movie, kind of from the perspective of the Atreides family and some of the people who work with them, as to how brutal the Harkonnens are. Like you see it a few clips, throughout the movie, but they are. I don't. The thing I think of is like King Leopold and like
Yeah,
going
yeah,
into the Congo and just
that's a good
brutally.
pull.
I
Yeah.
mean, I can't think of a more brutal method of colonization than just
Hmm.
extracting rubber and just cutting off people's hands. And
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
they talk about how they're torturers. I mean, it's very clear in 1963-ish, early 60s,
Yeah.
what Herbert is writing about. I mean, it's impossible to not. I didn't see much about his politics, his like deep political beliefs, but clearly he was critiquing colonialism,
Yeah.
neocolonialism.
Colonialism and environmentalism. I mean, he was a deep he had a deep belief in conservation. He worked as uh like a tour guide or a wildlife guide, and he was deeply passionate about preservation of nature. And you can see that as spice is clearly a one-to-one comparison to oil,
That's
you
exactly what
know,
I wrote down.
and the preciousness of water on Dune is he said himself, it's water itself. It's a one-to-one comparison to our dwindling resource of fresh water. I mean, even in the early 60s when nobody was talking about climate change or the effects of rampant pillaging of natural resources, he was talking about droughts and water preservation.
Yeah,
So,
you often look at like, I think of dystopian science fiction or dystopian fiction or sci-fi where
mhm,
it's in the future. In this case, it's more like a different reality, a different kind of universe. Whereas sometimes in dystopian fiction, it's, what will happen to us if we go on a
mhm.
certain path. Whereas this, it's almost like looking into the mirror, really, of this is what our world is actually like and will
Mhm.
continue to be like if we remain to the point of interstellar travel. We're just going to find some new resource
Are
and
we
we have
gonna
to.
yeah,
Yeah.
are we gonna just keep doing this shit? 20,000 years from now, is this what we're for? Just the extraction of resources and the slave labor that extracts that resource?
Yeah, and you mentioned the indigenous people to Arrakis, and so they're called the Fremen. And
Mhm.
the thing that's worth maybe talking about, even though we don't really get much detail on this till a little later in the movie, is you're meant typically, I think, from the Harkonnesses, fa-
Harkonnen.
Harkonnen, is that the
Yeah,
okay
I
Harkonnens?
I believe so. Yeah.
Okay, that they're this the way that you kind of see how we refer to people in Africa or the global south as, they're savage people who have no, understanding. We need to go in there and help them because they don't know how to
Yes.
operate their resources properly. But they had technology that almost exceeded that of
Mhm.
some of the people who were coming to them. And granted, they didn't have interstellar
Yeah.
travel, but they had special
Adaptation.
suits. Yeah, the adaptation
Yeah.
to living in a society where there's just almost no water.
Yeah. Yeah. The Harkonnens are clearly just a clear example of human avarice and greed and consumption. Because Getty Prime, they only show it for a heartbeat when they're showing the Baron, but it's a brutal oil-soaked world where the serfs are indebted to the masters and people are just used for slave labor. Harkonnens just torture and kill at will. Like the Baron himself is a visual example of just sloth and gluttony,
Yep.
and he can't maintain his own. He can't hold up his own body weight because of his various appetites. So what was I going with that? But yeah, he the Harkonnens are just this vicious avarice, and then they're brutalizing these indigenous people. And even later in the books, it goes a little deeper into the into how we colonize, because the good guys, well, spoiler,
That's fine.
good guys have colonized them and fulfilled the promises to the Fremen and brought green, changed the weather so people could live and have open water in the air. And the Fremen are like, you came in and you monopolized this spice that which is really the only thing you care about, and you've destroyed our culture. You assume that this is what we need, and you took our culture that we've had for thousands of years, and you changed it in a generation to fit your cultural view of what we should appreciate. And so it I mean, you get a deeper love of Frank Herbert's vision for this universe, though he was, in all honesty, kind of a clunky writer.
Yeah. It definitely, sometimes I felt like it's a little wordy. I don't know. Just kind of like,
Unnecessarily, yeah, kind of
yeah.
stilted. I do not like the omnipresent sort of narrative, you know.
Yeah.
So every character's thoughts all the time. So I'm not a fan of that.
Yeah. There is something to be said about, you could have it. I guess the flip side would be if you have it only from one or two characters' perspective, you kind
Hmm.
of don't
You
see
don't
the
get the whole
full.
picture. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Like, I just did, not saying it's equivalent in terms of writing, but the Hunger Games is all written from a
Hmm.
single perspective the whole time.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
that's just your view, and you don't get a view outside of it. So it
Yep.
is nice, but maybe there could be less of it. But I think the other thing that we didn't talk about is the Atreides family, or the House of Atreides, that have been selected by the Emperor to be this new, caretakers of Arrakis and the spice. And you kind of initially, I feel like in the movie, you're meant to feel. I know it's not the same kind of content, but it kind of reminds me of like the Game of Thrones and like the Starks, how they're kind of like the
Hmm.
honorable family
Yep.
that isn't as bad as the other imperialists, but they're still,
Imperializing.
imperialists.
Yeah.
They can they can put a little, a nice little rainbow flag on their bomber, but it's
Yep.
still the same bomber. And you do get the son Paul, who will become the main point of focus of this movie and future movies and books.
Hmm.
Is he's questioning kind of this, he's questioning his father and those around him, like,
Okay.
what's the reason for this? And I think
It's
it's
a
a
modern
reasonable.
take.
What's that?
It's a modern take that he would question his place and have doubts as to the colonization, or his duty to his family to uphold the his heritage or whatever. It's clearly a modern take, as that fits modern sensibilities. We don't colonization is no longer um, approved, by the majority of people. We frown on it, and so they're making him they're making him the good guy by questioning his role.
Yeah, and you're kind of left with the Duke Leto as, you've kind of have this sense that he cares about the indigenous people because he's sending it like a party
Mhm.
ahead of him to kind of make peace with them and kind of create a relationship ahead of time. So you do feel like he's cares about them, but on the other hand, is he simply just like playing the hand, you play because they're intelligent. They realize they don't want to go in there and piss off the
Mhm.
indigenous people. They have to make nice with them, otherwise things could go
Yeah.
south.
They say when Duncan Idaho comes back, the Jason Momoa character, and
Hmm.
says, I spent this many weeks with these people. They're fierce fighters. They're loyal. They're people I would enjoy living with. They're honorable. And then when he says that they're the fiercest fighters in the Imperium, and Duke Leto says that's the desert power that I need. So the whole time, yeah, he's reaching out. He's propagandizing that he's going to be a better ruler. You know, I'm
Yeah,
I'm I'm a fair glove, but he's still looking for that desert power that he can wield.
right. He's becoming friends with them because he wants to use them as a tool,
Yeah,
not as as his as
he
his
doesn't.
stick.
Yeah, he doesn't really value their humanity. He values their use.
Yes, exactly. And the thing too that isn't really, I feel like I remember it being more explicit in the book, is you don't really get a sense to also how wealthy, these different houses are in terms of
Hmm.
their vast empire. They have planets they rule, and they have their lands, and they make it pretty poignant. There's not that much in the movie of, the Atreides leaving, their home for Arrakis, but they're leaving, comforts of a nice place to go to a place that's
Hell,
not,
yeah,
very much not what they want to be at.
yes. They're leaving Caladan, which is a paradise world of oceans and lush, Greenland, to one of the most hellish worlds in the Imperium, a desert planet. You know,
Yeah, and you have, and so you mentioned, just to kind of bring in some of the other characters. So there's Duncan Idaho. You mentioned he's kind of like his, one of the I think his title is Sword Master, but just kind of like the head
yep.
of their army. And then you also have
Gurney
Oscar Isaac,
Halleck.
obviously plays the Duke. What's that?
Yep, yep.
And you
I'm sorry,
have
I got ahead.
Oh yeah, and then Josh Brolin, I feel like, is one of the other major pieces, who plays Gurney, who's sort of like the weapons master who trains Paul, in his kind of
Yes.
daily combat. And then you
Hmm.
have the Doctor, who becomes kind of important in terms of some of the backstabbery later. Um,
And
what is
there's
it? Is it pronounced you? Is you?
Yui.
Yui, yes.
Yep. And then there's Thuffer Hawat, who is the Mentat, who's
Yes.
the human computer and strategist.
And then I guess the only other, well, there's a couple other characters to include, but then there's also Jessica, Lady
Hmm.
Jessica, who is the, considered a concubine and, wife of the Duke. And I think I remember when
The mother of Paul.
yes, the
Just
mother of
just
Paul.
so you know. Yeah.
Yes. I think what was I going to go to? I guess we kind of have the point now where they're planning to leave their planet. They're going to Arrakis. They're kind of making their arrangements. Duncan
Hmm.
has gone ahead. They've now kind of created a little bit of a relationship with the Fremen when they get there. And I think we might want to talk a little bit about, or maybe I'm skipping too far ahead, is Paul and Jessica and the kind of the aspect of the Bene Gesserit as well. I think
Hmm.
this is a part of the book that when I was reading it or listening to it, I felt a little bit kind of lost at times with kind of
Okay.
the going back and forth. So I'm curious to see how you perceive sort of that. It's considered like not religious in my perspective. It's not religious, but it's sort of
No,
like
it's a sisterhood at the onset of um at the onset of human space exploration, and after they destroyed all. Okay. At one point in the past in this universe, there had been an artificial intelligence uprising. And so humanity had expunged itself of all thinking computers. And so at the onset of the destruction of all thinking computers, they created schools of thoughts. One is the Mentats, which are just humans that can compute and take higher mathematics that they can do in their head. And
Right.
another is the Bene Gesserit, which is a sisterhood who just trains their bodies and to a point of extreme where they can control every single muscle. They can control people with their voice. They have it's a very cynical school of thought because they have vast genetic um, vast genetic uh, plans that they go through. They breed people to gain specific traits.
Eugenics.
Yes, it is very much eugenics, which is, if people were curious, a big reason why Redditors and right wing sociopaths tend to like Dune. Is because it has some very questionable um, underlying tones to it. And then they also have another very cynical operation called Missionaria Protectiva, where they create and seed specific religions all across the universe that they can use to bend people to their will.
Including the
So,
Fremen.
yes, including the Fremen.
And the way I kind of look at their sisterhood and sort of this idea is it's almost like proselytizing or kind of bringing these seeds of religious thought to
Yeah.
different places. And you could say that's bad in the sense of
Hmm.
bringing religion to these places where it seems like there wasn't that kind of. I feel like the religion to some of these communities and these indigenous people was more just like kind of like living off the land and being one with their where they live, as opposed
Hmm.
to having a belief in a higher being. Which, not to say they didn't have one. I'm not saying God is bad, even though I'm not really a God believer myself. But
Hmm.
I don't know. I
But
guess
I mean,
go ahead.
there's throughout all of his books and several different different people like the Leilaxu and the Fremen, there's a deep undertone of Islam.
Yes.
And Frank Herbert was fascinated with Islam, fascinated with the Arabic people, and so it's in every all six or seven books have deep undertones of Islam in it. And so it's like the Bene Gesserit, they didn't seed Islam into the Fremen. They took what they already believed, that the Fremen had been victims of pogroms for generations, for millennia.
Yep.
And so they took these beliefs they already had, and they feed in like a mythos or like a savior mythology that the Bene Gesserit could then use to their benefit.
Right. And one thing, I think I sent you this article. You can check it out. I'll put it in the notes.
Hmm.
It's from Al Jazeera, and it
Yeah.
goes into a lot about the themes of Islam in it. But one thing I'll just mention is that they said in the appendix to Dune, the religion of Dune, there was something. The 10 teachings are almost all based on Islamic kind of ideas and religious ideas. So clearly, he was injecting that into
Hmm.
this, and then kind of the theme of this article too is they're referring to Paul Atreides' future in this world as a
Hmm.
crusade in the movie,
Yep.
whereas he kind of it's meant to be sort of a jihad. We don't have to go down that
Yes.
that whole path, um,
But
but
I mean, it bears mentioning that they swapped out jihad for crusade.
because of the
because
negative connotations that
yes,
people have for the term
yeah,
jihad.
like that the author of that article put it perfectly when he said Islam only sells in Hollywood when it's being shot at.
Yep.
So, I mean that's something to bear in mind too when you watch this film, that there are editorial changes to it that have to comply with American standards of correctness. And that means Islamophobia.
I mean, I think that's a theme that comes up repeatedly in many episodes of movies are made to make money for
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
capitalists who own these production companies,
Yep.
and whatever they can do to squeeze more money and be more
Yes.
palatable to more people is what they're going to do. And I
Or
can
if it's
fault
going
them
to be,
for it. I can fault them for it,
yeah,
but I understand their reasoning
yeah,
if I don't
yeah. I mean,
agree.
it's a business decision. I mean, we have to acknowledge it, but it's still it's still disgusting, and we still have to call it out when it happens.
Yeah, I think that's a good mention in it. And I think, the piece too, as we kind of I'm trying to think, does I'm now like slightly getting missed on my plot. Does Paul go and do his sort of his test of his strength before they leave, or is it after they arrive at Arrakis?
It's before they leave.
Okay, so maybe I
The
know we
one,
can discuss.
yeah, yeah. If you don't mind.
Yeah, no, I think that's a pretty powerful scene. And I think it's kind
Hmm.
of Paul is being trained in the way of the Bene Gesserit, this kind of combat style and sort of learning to use this voice, which enables him to essentially, it's almost like mind control in a crude
Hmm.
sense, where you can say something in a certain tone essentially, and it causes the person to do what you're asking,
Involuntarily, yeah.
voluntarily go along with it. And I hate to, it's hard for me not to think that, someone like Star Wars got the idea of, the
Oh,
Jedi mind trick.
Frank Herbert was pissed
Oh, was
about
he?
Star Wars. Yeah, he wrote down like a long list of everything that George Lucas stole from Dune.
Yeah, well, I mean, just the planet
Here's
where Luke is from is literally like a desert dirt
Tatooine.
planet.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
desert planet.
it's yes. Well, that's that's like a whole nother episode. But
Yeah.
so Paul goes to see the Reverend Mother, who sort of, would you say she's sort of like one of the leaders of the Bene Gesserit?
Oh,
Sort of like
she's yeah, she the Reverend Mother Hias or Gaius Helen Mohayim, I believe. She
truth
she's
sayer.
yeah, she's the hierarchical top of the sisterhood.
And he's basically brought upon her to be tested because
Hmm.
she kind of wasn't aware that Paul is being trained in this, mode
Hmm.
of Bene Gesserit, and basically was testing his strength, his will,
His humanity is what
his
it was.
humanity. And so
Yeah.
the scene is pretty cool in the book, and I think they did a pretty
Hmm.
cool job in the essentially putting his hand into a box and feeling excruciating pain, and he's able to
She holds a needle um, with the Gom Jabbar on the needle, and as
at his neck.
soon,
Yes.
yep, at his neck. If he moves his hand, she kills him. It's the way she describes it is that an animal caught in a trap will chew off its leg
Yep.
to escape the trap and bleed to death. That's an animal trick, she says. And a human will wait in the trap, suffer the pain, and then remove when the hunter comes to to capture the human, he will attack and kill that hunter and remove the threat from his species, and that would make him human.
Right. And so you have it's a pretty powerful scene, and
Hmm.
watching him kind of initially feeling seemingly great pain, and sort of you have the back and forth with his mother sort of envisioning what he needs to do. And it does seem like they have this connection, and they definitely have a connection where they can, I wouldn't say they can like talk to each other, but they definitely have a sense of each other's presence. Like
Hmm.
later when his father dies, he feels his death. It's clear that he has things within his bloodline that are
Hmm.
clearly, you know, powerful and sort of
For
superhero
science,
like. Yeah,
yes, yeah. That was that was also part of her, the Reverend Mother testing him, is because Jessica was supposed to give birth to a girl so that she could wed that girl to a Harkonnen boy, and then there would be peace, and then the child after that union would be the Kwisatz Haderach,
right.
which is
You
the
know,
super the elite human that the Bene Gesserit have been trying to breed.
yeah, and the thing they're very upset though that Jessica had had a boy instead of a girl. And it's like you were saying before, is they're clearly breeding in this way to create
Hmm.
this super human. And actually, it brings me to a good point where um, a quote from the author about sort of this superhero kind of mythos is he said that it was, that the idea that superheroes are disastrous for mankind.
Hmm.
And you could, I think it also is a good point to I know that we don't really get to that in this movie exactly, but you could kind of see Paul in the sense of being sort of that white savior kind of ideology of, the superior humans that are
Hmm.
coming into the imperialists can do better than the people who live there are, and the man being white. You could
Hmm.
kind of see it as it's hard to, you know, shake that little bit
Yeah,
of.
yeah. I see. I see the argument that it's a white. Okay, it is a white savior complex if he makes just this movie and the second part of this movie. If he stops at the first book, then and Paul is left as the hero, then yes, it's a white savior moment.
Yes, I should have qualified the first book.
Yeah, yeah. But as it goes on, it shows the complexity because the whole thing is a trilogy. The Originally he wrote it as a trilogy, and the second book shows that he's really just space Hitler because he leads his jihad out into space and kills billions of people in the name of his new empire. So it's a white savior complex for sure if it remains at just the first book.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if they continue to make additional movies.
Yeah.
I can't imagine they won't. I mean,
If it sells, they'll
yeah.
keep making them. Look at the
But
Avengers. Jesus.
oh god. Well, this is better source material than the Avengers.
Yes.
Um, but so this is the point. So after sort of this test, for his, him being potentially this savior, not I shouldn't say savior,
Hmm.
the kind of like the the one that they're looking for. This is sort of when we get a sense of they end up going to Arrakis now. So they're on Arrakis. I know we've tiptoed around some of the other themes of the movie as we're going
Hmm.
through, but clearly, the well, I'm just looking at my notes and sort of once they arrive there, they're clearly worried. The Harkonnens had destroyed and sabotaged most of the
Equipment.
materials
Yeah.
they needed to use for their spice harvesting and whatever the process is to refine
Hmm.
it. And you also get a sense too, I think it's very visually effective in showing the where they live, the Atreides live versus the rest of that planet. It's literally
Hmm.
just a gigantic wall that has kind of like a force field and massive complexes. And one thing that strikes me too in the movie is you never really see anyone except for the occasional, worker, the person who's watering
The
those
trees.
trees that
Yeah.
requires,
Yeah.
the just
It's hyper focused on the elite.
it is very hyper focused on the leap, but you don't.
Mhm.
I think that's I mean, it's intentional. Those are the characters of it, but you don't see the underworkings of probably the thousands of people that are required to
Yes.
probably run this place. And it kind of, in a way, you could say it's like sweeping under the rug in a,
Yeah, the masses. Yeah, the
yeah,
people.
you don't have any working class
Hmm.
people or even like petty bourgeoisie in this. Really, you have just like the family, and then you have the Fremens, and that's kind of it. And
Yeah.
clearly there's lots of,
That's an omission that I think Herbert himself was guilty of, because it was, the entire series is hyper focused on the elite, and um and the Fremen. And the Fremen are considered, of course, Fremen would naturally be the proletariat, of
right.
course. I mean, they're workers, they're struggling indigenous people, um, but it doesn't show the people, working inside the system of the um, of the feudal lords, the serfs. It,
Yeah,
it it doesn't show them at all.
it really does feel like you mentioned when you're talking about the Harkonnens before. It does feel like a feudal type system. There's
Yeah.
also one thing I forgot to mention before is there's constantly talking about the details of like how much they're going to make off of different spice transactions, and it's very
Hmm.
transactional. That's not
Yep.
really relevant necessarily to the plot, really, but I think it shows how little interest they have in the
And the
people, the indigenous
workers.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very
Yep.
one sided, and you're again you're meant to see the Atreides' house as kind of like the quote unquote good people, but they're still subjugating people nonetheless, as we've already clearly
Yeah.
stated.
It's still a castle, that this family resides in, with the whole servant staff and advisors and everything. But we're not allowed to see, the workers that make it all function.
And they also stay. I think it's at Duncan, Idaho, who learns when they get there that there's supposedly millions of Fremen who live
Hmm.
in these underground cities, which was kind of unknown until really this moment, that they don't realize how
Yes.
massive this population is and how difficult that must have been for them to survive. Other imperialists that have come there to
Yes.
keep their
That,
numbers
and
up, and you don't get to see that in this movie.
the
Uh,
Harkonnens, actively hunted Fremen. So, and they estimated them to be maybe 50,000.
right, and they're talking about a million plus
Millions. Yeah. Yeah.
millions of them. Just 50,000 in just one. I can't remember the word that they use for
Siege.
siege. Yes,
Yeah. Yeah. They
but
yeah, that would be a cave system where these families live, these
and,
tribes live.
and I think the other main piece that you're getting to going back and forth. So you kind of have them getting accustomed to Arrakis, and they're starting to see what they have to how are they going to accomplish, how are they going to survive here, and they kind of realizing. I think some of the things I was reading, kind of supplements, is that the Duke really saw this as a a mission that could not be successful. Like it was destined to fail. There's no way they could succeed in their mission. And I don't know if they explicitly say it, but maybe they imply that it's clear that the Emperor has done this intentionally to
Hmm.
rid them of this powerful house and destroy their line.
Yes. Yeah. The emperor was uh, it's the emperor is jealous. The baron, who's the actor that plays Baron Harkonnen? Because he's so good. He's in so many
Dave
things.
Bautista.
No, that's Raban,
Oh, you're
the
right.
beast, the Baron. Anyways, when Raban is asking the Baron about why this is happening, why they're being replaced, the Baron says the Emperor is a vindictive and jealous and powerful and dangerous man. And so it's implied that as uh, House Atreides, Leto Atreides is popular among his people and among the other lords because he's honorable and noble and has all these qualities that the emperor himself does not. The emperor is jealous, and so he wants to remove him. But
Yeah.
it's also implied later on that the Sardaukar, the fighting force that that comes to help the Harkonnens destroy the Atreides, they are they are the most powerful fighting force in the Imperium because they live on this Salusa Secundus, which is another hell world. And
It's like a
so
prison. I think it's a prison.
it's a prison planet, yeah. And so they are created, to be they exist on this planet to become soldiers for the Imperium. And
Yeah.
it's a hell world, which makes them tougher and stronger and faster. And so the Atreides, you know, kind of winkled this out and understood it, and so that's also why the emperor wants to remove him, because he's created a fighting force that's equal, if not better, than the Sardaukar.
Yes. Well, and then you realize, you don't get that much in this, but you learn that the Fremen are perhaps the
The
most
best,
powerful.
yeah,
Yeah, they are
yeah.
the best. They've lived on an even more
Being
desolate
hunted,
planet.
yeah,
Yes.
being hunted for generations, yeah.
Oh, and the actor you were thinking of is Stellan Skarsgård.
He's so good.
Yeah, he's
He's
in
so good.
he's in everything. He's in the
Yeah,
Andor
yeah.
series. He's in like a bunch of Marvel movie. I mean, countless
Hmm.
time. But yeah, he's a great actor. His just his voice, I feel like always just gets you. I mean,
Yeah, I don't
it's like a
know,
very powerful voice.
it's gravelly and deep and distorted, yeah.
Yeah, and so you have this plot basically for the Harkonnens. Did I say that? I said it right this time.
Yep.
For them to
Hmm.
basically take over the planet again. It's really just
Yes.
it's almost like
but it
they
but
were
it's
they're.
also,
Oh, go
yeah, I'm
ahead.
sorry, but it's also this ancient feud that Harkonnens have with the Atreides that dates back millennia to when the Harkonnens were banished by the Atreides for a period of time for cowardice on the battlefield. And so this is an old feud that they've had that also goes as a good cover for the emperor to have these people to for these people to be removed for the emperor, and the emperor to look as though he didn't have a hand in it.
It very much reminds me. I would be shocked if George R. R. Martin didn't also get a lot of inspiration
Inspiration,
from this.
just
I mean, you look at
the
you know,
deep
the
machinations. Yeah.
yeah, and you have I'm. It's been a while. I'm blanking on the house that lives sort of in the south that you kind of see as being kind of like a Middle Eastern group.
Oh,
I've-
Dorne. Yeah.
Dorn,
The
yes, I feel like it's very much like the Sand People kind of
Yep.
the.
Yep. Yep.
So it's
Yep.
very
That's.
hard to believe it wasn't pulled from Dune, and it's
Hmm.
maybe less obvious, but it's clear. Like you said, there's like in Game of
But then
Thrones, and this there's house
House
feuding.
Stark. House Stark is,
The
could be
honorable
based
house that
on
everyone wants
House
to be a part of, but
Atreides.
they will
Yes.
clearly people will betray them if it gets them
Hmm.
more power.
Yep.
You have all the houses that eventually,
Work against
uh,
them. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, the Harkonnens are kind of like the Lannisters, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
evil,
I think that's a good one for one.
the treacherous,
Hmm.
evil family who,
The gold digger. They mine gold. That they're avaristic.
yes, and so the one character we didn't mention, and I think it's Liet Kynes, the doctor who kind of works for the Imperium,
Hmm.
and you don't really get an obvious sense. And I think so. Maybe before I mention her, because it kind of fits into the plot too. Is so we kind of have now this. Essentially, there's a couple attempted assassinations of Paul. They have he's clearly a brilliant fighter in the sense that he's able to evade these different attempts on his life because basically they need the bloodline to stop. If he dies, there is no future for the house. But when that fails,
Yes.
they then have to take it one step further and destroy the whole family.
Hmm.
Cummings to the planet to destroy them. But as they're kind of escaping Well, did I miss over anything that you wanted to mention? Kind of, I know, I'm kind of
Just to get up to speed, finally the Harkonnens launched their attack.
yes,
Yui betrayed the family, poisoned, not poisoned, um, but stunned, uh, drugged the family so that he could remove a tooth from the Duke. He drugged the Duke, removed a tooth, replaced it with one with like a poison gas as soon as he crunched it, and told him that his wife, the Harkonnens were holding his wife, so he had to betray Leto. But I put this poison tooth in your mouth, and you can kill him on your way out.
avenge
Yes,
this.
yes,
Yes, that's a like such a cool scene, like where he's bent over at the edge of the table and there he's waiting and waiting until he gets close enough to do
yeah,
it, and
that's
unfortunately he
brutal.
survives. He's
Mm-hmm.
able to use his little like
The
gravity
the
suit.
the Baron survives. Yeah,
Yes, the Baron survives. Everyone else in the room is
toast.
just is toast. Yeah, but he uses
Yes.
like a it's like a gravity suit. I think it meant to
Well,
be. Or
the way he moves shit are just suspensor bots, but the force field was the shield that so many people were using.
yes, that's the one thing too. Is like when they're fighting throughout the movie. I think it's cool that they put on a little shield around them where
Hmm.
basic attacks won't hurt
Yeah,
you, but you can still.
fast attack. It repels anything moving fast, but it'll allow something moving slow in.
Yeah, if you stab someone, you can stab them through it, but you yes.
If you move slow, yeah.
So yeah, so after this sort of, I guess you could call it a bit of a coup against them. They've come in. The Harkonnens have come in, basically taken control, and Jessica and Paul have escaped. On one of these cool ass like dragonfly helicopter type thing. Yes,
Ornithopters, they're called. Yeah,
yeah.
and
They escape, and this is where you kind of really see the power of Paul kind of displaying through is, well, first they're in, they're jailed. They're not jailed. They're
they're
in captivity,
captivity. Yeah, yeah.
and he uses his voice to essentially escape from them,
Hmm.
along with the doctor who I mentioned, the Liet Kynes, who's an empirist ecologist. I don't know her
Yep.
official.
Imperial ecologist. Yeah.
And so they've now escaped, and in order to kind of fulfill their final escape, they have to go into basically what amounts to a sandstorm type of situation,
Hmm.
and uses his power, his kind of feeling,
Prescience. Yeah.
to land the vehicle
Safely.
with, yeah, safely without death. But of course, they're landing it into. We haven't mentioned. We've gone this whole time and mentioned any of the worms in the
Oh, yeah. Well,
which,
they come later.
yes, I think especially in the second movie
We're
they're going to
just
be big.
about there. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they've now landed safely. So they think they kind of use this high tech gear to, which I think is essentially the Fremen suits, where they can just
Yes.
extract
Yes.
water from your body, from your sweat to
Yep.
drink, because it's so.
Dr. Yui stashed equipment for them to survive in the storm if they in the open desert if they made it out. And they gave he sorry, Dr. Yui also wrapped up the Duke's signet ring so that Paul would
Yes,
continue to have it, and that's how Jessica found out that her husband died.
but I seem to remember it seemed like Paul kind of had the feeling in his, or
Hmm.
maybe it wasn't. Maybe I'm misremembering. The kind of like the sense that the ring kind of like made it clear, but they
Hmm.
almost felt like he was probably dead
Aware
already. Yeah.
already. Yeah. Yeah. This is when his prescience really starts to come out because he's forced into the desert and being surrounded by the spice, which has prescient abilities in it already.
Right, and
So
which we
so
learned earlier, he's
his
kind of allergic to it initially. He kind of
well
has a.
his yeah well his he had a vision, which is why he had collapsed that one time,
Yes, that's right.
because he had gotten a whiff of the spice. And so his breeding coupled with this drug that provides prescience to a small degree is forcing him to have, it has led him to this point where he's breaking through to his true potential.
Yeah, there's numerous visions of him meeting several Fremen that we then meet towards the end of the movie, which we'll get to in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's seeing both what he doesn't know, whether it's like a future of what's going to happen or simply a potential path. So
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of unclear at this point what those will mean, or as we get through.
Yeah, it's all still a question mark, and what he's seen are uh, possible futures, and what he does going forward will, whatever he does will affect which future comes true. And this is when he starts to realize that eventually his existence will cause this massive jihad or crusade that will lead to billions of people dying.
Yeah, he sees a few visions of like sort of fighting kind of clips, but you don't really
Get a full understanding of
you
what
don't
he's
get a full
seeing.
understanding at this
Yeah.
point, kind of what he's seeing. And I think this is when they finally decide to kind of leave their tent that they had constructed in the desert. They start, looking for the Fremen, looking for one
Mm-hmm.
of these Sieches, and they see, or they can begin to see one of these sandworms coming towards them. And at first, if you had just only seen the movie, you probably get the impression that he was able to stop the sandworm from coming, but instead it's the Fremen use these devices to create a kind of a rhythmic
A
pattern
rhythmic
in the
beating.
sand,
Yep.
which is what kind of which brings them to you, which is why they described
Mm-hmm.
earlier how they walk in a different way, which I think he's trying to show his mother to do
Mm-hmm.
this, to kind of walk in this almost non-rhythmic dance kind
Yes.
of
To,
style.
to blend into the natural sounds of the earth.
Yeah, they've clearly become to the point where they can live amongst these things. I think they say they're 300 feet long. Maybe it's larger, just
Just
massive.
giant. Yeah.
Yeah, just giant
Enormous.
worms that will swallow man, animal,
Yeah.
machine, everything.
Earlier in the movie, there was a giant spice factory that one head came up and just swallowed whole. So
Yeah.
these things are massive, and yeah, they're the natural. Well, they have a life cycle that is spice is dependent on.
Right. Um, I so this is so in when they're kind of saved essentially by the Fremen, for no reason. Initially, you think like, what's the reason to do it? And one line that I had noted that I think it's right after the group of the Fremens come upon Jessica and Paul, and I think so. The line that I thought was interesting was, "What wealth can you offer beyond the water in your flesh?" And I think it's like
Yeah,
a perfect line because they're essentially capital. They're not capital. Well, yes, they're capital, but they're billionaires, whatever sense of money exists. But that doesn't mean anything to the
yeah,
Fremen. They literally only need water. It's worth more than anything, any
yeah. What are
money.
they gonna do? What are you gonna do with cash when it has no value?
Yeah,
You know?
there doesn't seem to be any money within the Fremen from what I can
No.
gather. It's they're working together as a collective.
Yes.
They're basically, I don't want to
Yep.
say they're a communist society, but they're a collective group that does and builds everything they do together.
Everything they do. There's one quote. Um, Belongings or shoot, something belongs to the individual, but the water belongs to the tribe, which means the family or whatever can collect um, whatever goods and items a fallen family member had, but they will get rendered down to water, and that water belongs to the tribe.
Yes. I was trying to see if I could find the full quote, but I didn't. It wasn't listed as one of the IMDb quotes. I didn't have the whole
Okay.
script open. But I mean, then this is we're kind of pretty much near the end of the movie, and they're basically deciding. Actually, I think
He meets Zendaya.
yes,
Zendaya.
Zendaya.
Can,
Yes,
can can we just appreciate how beautiful she is for a minute?
yes. Well, and what's one thing that we it's not really worth a discussion, but they do numerous times talk about
Blue and
the
blue
blue
eyes.
eyes
Yep.
of the Fremen, and throughout his visions he sees her consistently. Like
Yes.
that's the vision realized. And I think when he finally does meet her, he isn't as surprised as you would think he is of seeing
Hmm.
someone he's been literally dreaming of in visions, but he almost expected that to happen. And it's like a
Yeah. Well, that's I think that speaks to his burgeoning prescience, where he's starting to see every possible future, and so he's seen her innumerable times already. Like in the books, there's one quote where he says, um, "Prescience means the rest of your life is boring." Because he's been through every avenue already. He's seen her numerous times, so he knew he was gonna meet her.
yeah. Well,
But
I actually realized we did skip over one pretty awesome part. I think this is after they're captured, but then had escaped, and they actually go into sort of one of the Fremen's sort of underground bunkers during
mhm.
the attack. And it's a pretty, it's like this little fortress, and essentially Duncan Idaho gives himself up for no
Yeah,
Duncan, yes,
yeah,
gives
yep.
himself up for to save them. So
So they had time to escape. Yeah,
right.
yeah,
That
that
scene
was
is really
sick.
cool. Yeah, that whole scene is pretty badass. And that's when they then escape on their what do you call that? What is the name of the plane?
Ornithopter.
That's when they steal, or not steal. That's when they take that and they end up in this final scene. And so they basically they want to be taken to the rest of the Fremen to
Yeah, they want
be
to be
saved.
safe. And one of the Fremen is dishonored by being bested by Paul, and so he calls him out and says, uh, through some Fremen right, that he has to prove that he's the Laysan al Gaib, their prophecy, the one, you know, throughout all of this, the undertone is that the Fremen consider him to be a possible um, mythological figure or savior. And so he calls him out for physical combat. And so he's dreamed about Jameis is the Fremen too. He's dreamed about Jameis and has said Jameis is my friend. And so he ends up winning and killing Jameis in this combat. And he doesn't want to be, he's never killed before. And so he cries. And the Fremen, this is another another point to where they worship him even more because he's shedding water from his eyes, and he doesn't want to kill, which is all alien to them. And like just another mythos to add into the savior, into the worship, the figure worship, the hero worship.
Yeah, all they've known is people who come to their planet
Hmm.
to kill, and simply for almost for fun and for sport, as some of them
Yeah.
have, and other cases simply for the raw materials. Whereas he cares deeply about the
Hmm.
planet, and he had explained to his mother how the suit worked, where they could extract the water. He has well, he did, kind of an excessive learning. I think you have a bunch of it in the book, is where he's learning about the place where he's going to go. He's learning about Arrakis before he gets there, and he's clearly eager to learn and he cares about the environment in the way that the Fremen do, and I think they see that in him.
Yeah. Yeah. And then where were we? Yeah, after Jameis. Oh, sorry, I got distracted by my neighbor was dancing in his. Sorry. Yeah, he bests Jameis, and then I think isn't that close to where the movie
That's pretty much
ends?
the end. I mean, you kind of see him then like going off with the group of
Zendaya,
them.
yeah.
Yeah, Zanaya, and I think that's pretty much the end. They don't really show you any glimpse of what's happening outside of
Hmm.
that perspective. Again, this is only half of the first book, and
Yeah, yeah. It's
you can see how dense the book is.
yeah. I can't imagine. And the movie was 2.5 hours long, so I can't imagine them putting the whole book into a single movie. I'm glad that we are going to get the second half of it. I just hope that they continue to make them.
I mean, given how well the first one did, and especially when it
Yeah.
came out, it was in 2001, a
Yes.
time when people weren't really even going to the movies very much. And given
Yeah.
how well it did, I think there's no reason in my mind how it could fail. I mean, I think one thing you mentioned before that bears kind of repeating is that just like many movies that I've done on the show, where one group of people, people on the left side of the spectrum see the
Mhm.
movie in one light, and then you have conservatives or
Yeah.
right wingers who see it on the other side. I can
Yep.
think of
They
American
see.
Psycho as one, like the memes of people,
Yeah.
the profile pic of Patrick Bateman is a very obvious one. I think this one is less obvious just because it's not. I mean, it's very popular,
Hmm.
obviously, given how long it's been around, but I don't feel like it's in top of mind to some people. I peeked around on the Reddit subreddit where there was conservatives talking about this movie. It wasn't the
Hmm.
Dune subreddit because it was like a separate one, and it's some pretty vile
Dark
stuff.
spaces. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't go too deep because I
Yeah. Looking on YouTube, I saw that Ben Shapiro had a take on Dune, and I just kept
yes,
scrolling. Like
I
I don't
I
care.
saw he had a take, and I decided I was not gonna do it
Yeah,
for
I
myself.
don't give a shit. Shut up, idiot.
One
But
of the
yeah, I mean,
things,
it
yeah,
has feudalism, it has eugenics, and if not, if you don't have any knowledge of the author at hand, then and if you take it on face value that Paul is the good guy, throughout the whole series, then yeah, you're gonna have. I mean, I could see it in myself if I had gotten deeper into it as a youth before the internet was a thing, then yeah, I could see myself being influenced in a negative way by this book without a better understanding of what was at stake, of what was being said.
yeah, I mean,
So,
if that's already your worldview that America is the good guy, that the
mhm,
things we've done to improve wealth and such on is
yeah,
like a good thing, then it's not much of a leap to say, oh well, I see this in the book. This is
mhm,
similar. I also agree with this. And a lot of the things I saw too about their perspective was they probably would have seen the Duke of the Atreides, Leto, as this
good
shithead
guy.
who's kind of in the way of like
Oh, the Harkonnens, yeah,
yeah,
get out of here. But no, like yeah, I mean, presented on face value, I mean, you're a young, impressionable person, and you see, oh look at all this good stuff that we've done for these primitive indigenous people, and ignoring the entirety of their culture and the entirety of their technological prowess. Just look, we gave them our culture. Isn't that better? So I could see it influencing people in the wrong way, in an unintentional way.
you know what, I saw this a couple weeks ago, I think, when we first discussed doing this. Did you know that Herbert is the distant relative of Joseph McCarthy?
I did not know that.
He referred to him as cousin Joe.
Oh man.
which I mean, I don't necessarily think it specifically influenced his ideas, but I
His
think
writing, yeah.
he's very much like, I think a lot of science fiction writers probably lean slightly more to that anarchist,
Hmm.
anti-government, but anarchist
Yeah.
sort of libertarian, but not right libertarian, more like left
Yes.
libertarian.
Yes.
I
Yes.
That's my impression from his.
Yeah. He's spoken on how the Atreides are not to be viewed as heroes. He said how hero worship is detrimental to society. You
Yeah,
know, and he set up Paul as initially this trope as the hero figure, only to be realized that he's the trope is detrimental. The trope is not good. You know, you don't want to be the colonizer.
that's exactly where you get it. This goes back to the like reading of this. There's two ways. It's very easy to read that commentary of the book as the opposite of what you just said, as
Yes.
which is
Yes.
I think it's the unfortunate nature of media. I think it's important generally. I think
Yeah.
so many people don't have media literacy around not just
Hmm.
like the media on TV, but pop culture,
Yeah.
movies, music,
Yeah.
books, and I think it's important to make sure people.
I mean, how many right wingers love Rage Against the Machine? You know, it's a problem
Or The
that
Punisher.
we yeah. Oh Jesus. You know what? Just after a certain point, you just got to write off a character. Like we can't get the Punisher back.
No, which is a shame because they had that show a few years ago on Netflix, which I actually really liked.
That
I feel
was
like
fun. Yeah.
it did make him out to be the character. I feel like if any conservative saw that show, they couldn't possibly be like, oh, he's the guy we like, but they just they
Oh,
kind of
they
just
see
push.
what they
They
want.
just yeah,
Yeah.
they do. Um, but is any other last bits about the movie or even the books that you wanted to kind of to mention? It could be about kind of the story arc beyond the
Mhm.
movie, but anything more about.
I just really this was a transformative um, series of books for me when I needed it. Um, I was able to read it without. I enjoyed it without going too deep into the subtext, and then I enjoyed it more as I grew and appreciated the subtext involved. So I think it's a great book, 16 and up for anyone, and it's a great series. I think the series gets better as it goes. I think it goes more in depth. I would say, I do not think um, Jessica was portrayed very well in the movie
Yeah,
because
we didn't talk about her a lot.
yeah, she's over emotional in every scene, and she just isn't in the source material. I think the Atreides aren't as honorable and noble. They speak openly about how they propagandize in the books. Um, but those are small details. Um, the author he had a deep love for the Bene Gesserit, as it shows in the later books. But yeah, I think it was a great adaptation and just a
Yeah,
fun movie. Not even for anyone going into it fresh that just has a love of science fiction. I think it's just a fantastic movie.
yeah, I would agree. I think that with regards to Jessica, I think it's just unfortunately a common theme. I feel like when it comes to science fiction, not of course, there's always the mistreatment of female characters in movies a lot of times anyway, but I think they could have done better to make her in a more
Yeah.
positive light. Because I was thinking the same thing. I feel like she is a much stronger character in the book than
Hmm.
she is in this. They kind of make her seem a little bit weak.
Yeah.
which I
Yeah.
don't think was the case. But
No, I mean she's from a sisterhood that trains you to be in full control of your body and emotions and mind. And she's much more independent and stronger willed in the books.
yeah, I mean, they're trained as not, I want to say assassins is probably not the right word.
I saw someone describe the Bene Gesserit as what was it? Space ninja witches. That's pretty great. That's pretty spot on.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll see obviously later is how powerful the Fremen, challenging the ideas of. That's why I feel like the second one is going to be really interesting with
Hmm.
how the Fremen play out and how they show them as warriors and show them as not being this primitive indigenous people that
Yeah, you'll get a better sense of what their culture is.
yeah, agreed.
That's exciting for me. Did you see they got Christopher Walken to play the Emperor?
I did see that.
That's gonna be killer.
Yeah, they have
That's gonna
they
be great.
definitely did. That's the other thing we didn't mention is that the cast in all of in this movie
So good.
is pretty
Incredible.
much end to end. Every person in this movie is
Yep.
big name actors. I mentioned Josh
Josh
Brolin's,
Brolin, Jason
Oscar Isaac,
Momoa, Oscar Isaac is so good. Fuck, who's the actor? Javier, is it Javier Bardem
who
that plays
plays Stigler.
Stilgar?
Yeah, he plays
Stilgar,
really good.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
Uh,
he's
and I think
brutal.
the woman who plays the there's one other person that's pretty good, and I can't think of who it is. I'm blanking, but yeah. So it's end to end. I think also I talked to someone recently about this movie, and they thought they liked it, but they felt like it was a bit slow and kind of developing. And I
Hmm.
think a lot of movies where they have
That's
to
fair.
take a book and kind of make multiple movies, you can't. It would have sucked if it had been a 3-hour movie and they put the whole book in, and then it just kind of was all action. I feel like I'm
Yeah,
glad that they didn't just say we're gonna make it just an
I mean
action movie.
I mean they were going to run into that problem no matter what, because I mean that's why it's been unfilmable for 60 years, you know.
Yeah,
So I'm just glad they were able to. I think the editing was pretty spot on. They kept in what had to be. They left out maybe some details that could have been left out.
yeah. The only other thing I'll say too, so the music was Hans Zimmer, which also is
Oh,
like kind of an
so good.
underrated piece to it. But yeah, it's a solid movie that I
Hmm.
enjoyed more than I thought after having listened to the book. I felt like,
Hmm.
is this going to work? And I think it does.
Yeah, yeah, I think it was great.
Awesome. Well, Commie Trucker, you can let everyone know where they could find your work
Oh,
and which I'll also note in the notes too.
yeah, I'm at commie_trucker on Twitter. Um, I'm at old man commie at TikTok, and my podcast Left Without Borders you can find on YouTube or on. We just finally got our podcast on iTunes,
Oh, sweet.
so I'm excited about that. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
you can
yeah.
give me the links and I'll obviously put them in the notes. But yeah, it's
Oh
been
yeah.
again great to have you on again, and it's been a good
I
time.
had a blast.
Yep. So again, we've been talking to Commie Trucker about the 2021 movie Dune, and the second movie comes out this November. Stay tuned at some point after that, perhaps for
Part
a
two.
episode on the second one of these in this an original book from the Dune trilogy. No, trilogy, even though there's 5 books, right? I
Six.
6.
Yeah, there's
He made
6.
them later on. But again,
Mhm.
yeah, you've been listening to Left of the Projector, and you can find us on all the places you find stuff. Left of the Projector Pod. And
Hooray.
have a good one.
Bye.